I think one of the problems, and I want to kind of see what you think about this, is that music in our culture today is it's like a commodity, right? If you're bored, you just pop on some headphones, listen to music. If you're cleaning the house, you pop on the headphones, listen to music. If you're, if you're trying to maybe work out or get amped up for something, you listen to music. We listen to music whenever we want to. We go to the ballpark or a stadium and they're playing music. You hear music on your car on your way to work or whatever it is. It's just a commodity. It's like everything else that we use. Whereas music for the, in the Bible, at least when we look at that, was really about, it was attached to an event or a moment in time. Yeah. Right. And that moment in time, once it passed, it didn't exist anymore. So, for example, when they won a war, they would break out into song. They would break out into, a celebration. And so whenever they would hear that song, they would remember that's when we won the war. And in this case, that's when God gave us the victory for that war. Right. Right. Or when they were able to establish a king, that reminded them, there was music and celebration among that. And upon hearing that song again, perhaps they would be reminded of that. And there's some of that still exists today, obviously. I mean, there's certain songs that are special to us and they remind us of something. But do you think because music has become such a commodity and has become a way of just making money for a lot of people and getting exposure, becoming popular, one of the saddest things to see is real true talent. I always think about Michael Jackson, and he wasn't a believer, but he was one of my favorite artists of all time. I can't say that I didn't love his music because I'd be lying to you.
Absolutely.
But one of the saddest things was that someone who has such a gift of God, really, and a natural talent in his voice, it was basically taken by those that were around him, and it was perverted to something else, and all for the sake of popularity and making money or whatnot. And we know how he ended, and that story is the same story for a lot of artists out there. It's like they lose the true passion that they had behind what they were doing, and it just becomes a commodity. It's just something that they use in order to get something else that they want. And so how do you view that? Because for me, we no longer view music so much as putting it to an event, to a historical event, let's say. It's not how we hear it anymore. It's just something that we hear all the time, so any comments on that?
And that's interesting. You made me actually think about something that I've never even thought about. Because as we know, especially as believers, everything has an origin or a first occurrence. As we read and we study scripture and things, we look back and we identify as far as the word goes, oh man, this was a first occurrence of this happening, or this is the first time this ever happened, in scripture. Just a small example, even with Adam and Eve having a child. Having, Cain and Abel, that was the first births, that had ever existed, naturally, you think of in those type of terms, right? And so, like, when you were saying all that, it made me think about something like music. It's first, when it, for whatever first song, and I don't know, I have to, that's something now I'm gonna be wanting to go and look in the scripture to find when was the first song, when was the first indication of a melody or something being put out like that. But where I'm going is, I'm willing to bet that for sure, whatever it was to give God glory. It was to bring. So basically, the origins of music. Obviously, music is a gift from God. Obviously, because I think about all the genres we have today. R&B. Classical, jazz. And all these different things. And none of them are in most of them anyway, in their own right. They're not bad, in a sense, they're not bad things, it's just music. But I'm like, when you think back, what was its first use? What was its first purpose? First evolved. We didn't have all these other, things. Like I said, now we just listen to it. It's not tied to an event.
But I'll tell you what, let me get my wife is sitting on the other side of me. She's my off-screen researcher.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have her look up if you can, Zuli, if you can find this, the first time that we see a song in the first song in the Bible. I think it might be in, I want to say like Judges or something like that.
Yeah.
It may even be in the Pentateuch. I'm not sure. And then
And I
we'll
know
look
they
it
were
up.
like,
Maybe we'll read it and kind of look
yeah,
at that.
because I know there were like celebration moments, like, and
Correct.
like even like moments it was used to what was it? The Wall of Jericho. I
Right.
mean, but I don't know if there was necessarily was a song there. It may just been,
Well,
blowing the
that's
horn. Just,
yeah, that's an instance. Yeah, that's an
you
instance
know,
of music
right.
being used. And that was something that I was reading that I found really interesting. And I think maybe you'll find interesting while Zuli looks for that, and then we'll try to get back to
Yeah.
that. But there's this idea that developed in Jewish culture and kind of tradition that there were some magical powers that were mixed in with music.
Hmm.
Exodus 15. Okay. So it's Exodus 15, and we'll look at that in a second.
Awesome. Hey, Zuli.
Um, he says hello.
Yeah.
She's off on the other side. She's my
Yeah.
off camera researcher. She's happy with that job. Although she's much more pleasant to the eye than I am, that's for sure.
Oh yeah.
So we see it and actually in Exodus. So according to the research here, the Song of Moses and Israel, and it looks like it's a whole chapter. And
Yep.
so if I'm correct, this is right after the crossing of the Red Sea. So to your point, when you were talking about it's a song, right?
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
song or words in music are part of music as well. Would you
Yes.
agree? Okay, because in your family, I believe you have a violinist, which is your daughter. You're a pianist, organ player as well, and all that. And then your wife is kind of the singer of the group. I know you do some singing, but she's kind of the vocalist.
Oh yeah,
really.
she's the vocalist.
And part of my voice, if I'm got a little bit of a sore throat today, so I'm a little bit on the I don't want to lose my voice here, but so words, music is in many ways always not always, but many times accompanied by singing. Right. And really singing or humming or a tune, right? Even whistling, that's music, even if it's at its most basic form. Beating on your chest, it can be a form of music, in the just most basic ways. Right. And so, here we see a song that's being sang. Who knows that maybe there were some guys kind of keeping a beat, I don't know if you're one of those guys, someone starts singing, I'm trying to keep a beat, you know what I mean? It's just, this is naturally how I am. But so to your point on, chapter 15, the Exodus, there you kind of see which says then Moses and the sons of Israel sang this song to the Lord and said, and then literally, I think it's like 20 verses later. Yeah. And then it kind of ends 20 verses later or something. So, I mean, that's a heck of a song, which, that's another thing about a lot of worship music today. It doesn't seem to really go back to the Bible, and that kind of goes to the point that I was bringing up earlier about magic and magic and music, because what happened. I don't believe in magic, by the way. Let me just
right. Yeah,
but there's a reason I'm bringing it up, and it's because as there were moments in history like Jericho, and this you reminded me of this when you mentioned Jericho, where the sound of the trumpets of this roar, right, was accompanied, or at least they thought it was accompanied. That'd be the right way to look at it. But they thought it caused the walls to come down. And it wasn't. God was the one that caused the walls to come down. There just happened to be this noise that accompanied that moment. Right. And so there's an obedience and all of that kind of going into it.
Exactly.
But it was over time and tradition and just kind of down the line, like everything else. We talked about depravity in the beginning, and the human nature were fallen. And that it got turned into this kind of magical thing. And when you hear a lot of musicians, even Christian artists talk today, they'll talk about music in that way. It moves me. It makes me feel
Right.
this way. It's like
Yeah.
almost mystical or magical. And it's not meant to be that. You know,
Right.
if anything, music is something that God gave the talent for men and women to have in whatever capacity they have it. And like everything else, we use it to worship God. You
Right.
know, we use it to, how do we use this to glorify God? You know, even,
Yeah.
you know, you're a, you know, you're an engineer essentially. You know, you work on
Right.
airplanes and you make sure they don't fall from the sky. It's basically your
Right.
job, you know.
Exactly. Exactly.
And you know, it takes a brilliant mind to do that and to figure those things out, and you know, be how is it, ice cold, you know, to make sure that when you sign off on that paperwork, the
Right.
stuff was done the way it was supposed to be. So
Right.
you know,
I
you
don't
got
miss,
that
yeah.
that
I don't know
pressure
if
you
it's
got
a
to deal with.
brilliant mind, but maybe a careful mind. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't leave it at
Yeah.
brilliant. I think you're brilliant, man.
Go ahead.
But so you know, you still, when you go to work, you know, the Christian idea is that we do what we do as unto God.
Exactly.
But for some
Exactly.
reason, music has lost that. Music's become kind of its own thing that you do, and it moves people a certain way, and it's almost always emotional. That's what I've noticed. And
Right.
you know, there's a lot of pastors, for example, and me, you and I may differ on this, but I still want to discuss the point because I want to see where you're at.
Okay.
You
Okay.
know, where if they don't have the music, they just can't get amped, or they can't preach right, or they can't get excited, or you know, they
Right.
need that, whatever it be, the organ. And you know, you come from a gospel
Oh yeah.
background,
Oh yeah.
black churches, you know.
Oh yeah.
I've been, obviously we went to church together, and I was at a
Yeah.
black church with you. I
Right.
had been to black churches, visited before. I come from a Spanish Pentecostal background where music
Right.
is, you gotta have music, right?
Yeah.
And the louder it gets, the more emotional people get and all of that.
Right.
You know, I'm way different now. I'm no longer that way. My worship is much more tempered. It's much more mind centered than it
Right.
is emotional centered. I think that's an argument that Paul made. I believe when he was talking to the Corinthians. Maybe we can look that up. But you know, it's a strong point that he made, that when we're in service, he was like, hey, you know, use your mind and your spirit. Don't just go all off and wild, you know,
Right.
and all these things. You want to be focused. And so what do you think about that? I mean, how much has the culture that is just making, I'm just going to call it kind of what I think it is happy worship music, and
Right.
that kind of creeping into the church, and making everybody else kind of, you know, see music as the thing. If they don't have music, they can't worship. Does that make
Right.
sense? Where
Yeah.
music is an accompaniment, or it accompanies worship, it's
Exactly.
not worship
It's not
itself. And
exactly.
and I think it's been distorted. What, do you agree with that,
Man,
or how do you feel
that's
about that?
that's that's deep truth right there. You know, I think it has been a lot to that point, to the point of, even if you look on a program, you know, you look at churches that they write out programs. Um, in some churches, the section or the portion where the singing is, that's what they call that. So they may have devotion, scripture reading, worship, and it'd be like an A and B or something that the choir sings, or praising,
Right.
whoever singing, and then on to the next thing, you know, offering, and so on and so forth. You know, and that's interesting that you said that. I never really thought about it like that. You know, that it's like, so just because singing is going on right there in music, it's titled worship, and so,
Yeah.
but that's right. That's not truth. You
No,
know,
the whole service is a worship service.